The Shawl by Cynthia Ozick. My first Ozick. And this was, I'm sure this, I hope this to be the first of many. And this was published originally so there's two different versions from my understanding. There's the shorter kind of condensed version that appeared in the New Yorker in 1980. And there's the version that showed up in on itself, I published 9 years later. So yeah, I think those differed in the sense that the um, New Yorker version focuses more like on the war, Holocaust aspect of it, and the horrors of what the characters had to go through, and let the characters Rosa, Stella, and Magda. Um, uh, and then the other version talks about like what happens like post-war. So in the United States. So yeah, so the show follows a the those characters, Rosa and her little girl Magda, who is only 14 years old. I think they mentioned, or maybe she doesn't make it past 14. But yeah, so then her niece Stella are basically stuck in this kind of very frantic kind of frenzy of Holocaust, like the most insane circumstances you could think of, like the most inhumane, cruel circumstances. Originally hailing from Warsaw, they are kind of obviously at the height of the war. There's probably the ghettos, like the Krakow ghetto of Poland was like a pretty big one. That they were the whole liquidation aspect was completely underway at this point, and they were just trying to like basically there was no limits to like what to how horrible this was. It kind of reminded me a bit of The Painted Bird by Jerzy Kosinski, in the sense that the except with this was a little bit less kind of magically real, that in the sense that this was just kind of the brutish type of thing with that. But in the same time, I believe Kaczynski actually meant that to be a yeah, as a pretty nonfiction realist book, but at the same time, he just kind of disappears into fantasy just as a coping mechanism because he himself had to kind of do that. So he's like trying to use that as more or less a way of reconciling, those horrors. And in the same way that, one of my favorite movies, Life is Beautiful, the Italian movie that it, obviously it's like a lot more upbeat, and he doesn't show any of the horrors. Like he's like the whole point is that the father is trying his best to show, um hide his son from the like these disgusting repulsive things that would shock him, and he's trying to do that through his wit and his comedic imagination. And yeah, so in this case Rosa is like they're basically are um, Stella is like so at this point so far gone. Like she has like tumors on sticks for her legs. And then Rosa has also is like basically they basically keep Magda kind of conserved her warmth in the shawl, and that's where the shawl comes in. So the shawl is like kind of this not transparent, but a kind of a motif that kind of transcends the war and everything. It's just like it means a lot. It's so there's a lot of ripe thematic elements to this shawl. Not only does it like save them, literally save them, with basically Rosa and them all sucking on the shawl because it's the only nutrients they have left, and like it's getting to the point where they're literally talking about it's hard to hear, but um, Magda trying to feed, or I'm sorry, them trying to feed her with like their nipples are so like malnourished and like completely like unable to provide their little girl with nutrients. So basically they have to sorry, so yeah, in that case, yeah, she doesn't have I was gonna say that maybe, yeah, Magda was a lot younger, but anyway, so the guards are now kind of corralling them off into different areas, and after they're taken out of this this ghetto. And yeah, they basically end up like kind of defeated because they feel like the guards are just going to shoot them. But what ends up happening is they end up surviving because they using the shawl. But once they're thrown in the camp, they basically they're trying to find a safe haven, but like they're still like fearful. Like every single day is like a gamble because they could be shot and they could be discovered with their baby in their shawl, and they basically take using the shawl to warm themselves up again, and they are try to savor the warmth that they have, and Magda, this poor little girl, is now screaming because they're separated now, and then what ends up happening is the Nazi guards throw Magda into an electric fence and like kills her instantly, and Rosa ends up stuffing the shawl into her mouth to kind of prevent her screams, and that's that's the end of that scene, and it's like this part is like it's very very graphic, it's quite detailed, but it's also it's literally less than like I want to say 10 to 20 pages of this whole story is like pretty. It's not. I remember the whole story. I think maybe is like let's say a 3 hour read, but that first part is only like less than a fifth or maybe a fourth. It's not. It's really not that long, but it's so intense. So it's been cited as uh, literature that's able to communicate the horrors of the Holocaust without, in less than, I think, 2,000 words is like what the have critics have said about it, in that it's so successful in doing that because it's like show don't tell. It's like that classic kind of thing. It's not. It's showing exactly. It's not begging you. It's not trying to elicit fear. It's not trying to elicit you to But anyway, so after the war, they Rosa ends up living in the United States, and she in Florida, and she ends up having her own kind of a business. I think it's like a clothing business. I think it's not a haberdashery, but it's some kind of kind of honest, kind of hard, kind of business where she caters to other women and uses her talents for, I think, sewing, and I believe, but I think as a seamstress, but I think she ends up actually getting so angry that she ends up using an axe to destroy her shop. So basically what happens is her niece Stella, they've been through so much together, ends up convincing her to go down to Florida for some, R&R, classic, just kind of to, just some, recuperation and convalescence, to just get some breathing room. And what happens is that she listens, surprisingly, because Rose is quite a little bit stubborn. She's quite stuck in her ways. Like she's always talking about how great Poland was, and she's from Warsaw, obviously. So and then she's always a little bit on playing the moral upper hand. Like she's constantly, nothing seems to be good enough. America's like like their decline kind of remind me in some way of the way a lot of Russian Orthodox kind of people think of the West, or like the United States, and I don't blame them because it is kind of a little bit glib the way we kind of our attitude. But yeah, she has a kind of this demeanor, like, but she ends up going to a laundromat and by chance meeting another guy by the name of Simon Persky, who is also from Warsaw and also dealt with similar things, but you wouldn't have known it because he's such an upbeat, forthcoming guy. There's nothing. He's so laid back and just relaxed about any situation he finds himself in that at first I thought he was kind of just a little bit glib or kind of too casual, like a little bit like he had no. At first I thought he had no place to be that not harsh toward Rosa, but with her saying that she needs to like get out of her shell and like kind of warm up to people a little bit more, and he's able to do that, tease out like a side of her. But then I realized that he was through similar circumstances that could have just been as bad, but he's found a way of moving on and not staying in the past. So yeah, he's able to kind of spend the day going around, and he's like some of the time he seems like a diamond in the road, like he's a little bit he's some of his motives are seem pure, but his the ways in which he goes about things, like he's like follows her home one time and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I followed you, or a little bit questionable at times, but yeah, you can't help but feel like um that he's trying to do the right thing. At least he's trying to get through to Rosa, and he knows what happened, and basically Rosa is in her 50s at this point, I believe, maybe late 50s, and yeah, so it's probably about maybe present day at this point. So she's like completely flabbergasted at the way culture in the world has turned out, especially the Western world, and she's like, she really doesn't like to like leave home and get out of her out of her comfort zone too much, and she's kind of embedded, entrenched in her ways. So there's like a moment when she's going through Florida and she's still kind of still trying to get it's painting a kind of almost like a slice of life of her of this day, but in particular she's like still trying to she's still struggling to kind of do this, to not kind of be to not brood in the past, when she's like going through these, I believe she's like in this hotel and she's like walking on a beach in Florida, and she sees these like two men that are on a nude beach, and they're she's like disgusted by them, and she's like, no, how dare they do this, and then she ends up telling, I think, the manager of a hotel, and he's like, like, leave me alone, like there's nothing. But yeah, it's like so at the end of the story, it's everything kind of comes to a conclusive end, where she finally lets Simon into her life, and goes on, I think, like a few dates with him, but is like able to, I'm not sure to what degree that was just friendship or what degree there was a genuine attraction between them, but it is it was an affable kind of relationship that they had, a concord and rapport between the two. So they ended up, basically at the end, Cynthia is, oh, I'm sorry, Rosa is, has found this box in her room that Stella has sent her, that she's like kind of wary of opening, and it ends up having the shawl in it. So that it's kind of comes full circle, and yeah, that's how it ends. So yeah, the story has a very interesting way of. I mean, Ozark is a really masterful writer, and like there are moments where it brooded on like almost like so writerly, in a way that almost was reminiscent of like Nabokov's kind of eclectic prose, and other times he was very poetic, and then other times he was kind of almost in the sense of like almost like a beat poet, kind of like a like I remember one of them was like flatulent bachelors, like the way that it rolled off her tongue, and that in such a way that was almost a little bit redolent of something you might find in like the sick. Maybe that was just because she was like in the counterculture thing, I think, or not, or she was like not necessarily privy or part of, but was just grew up around that time. So maybe these, but again, this is my first Ozick novel, but yeah, I believe I'll try to go on to The Messiah of Stockholm. That was one of her novels, and definitely she was like, it's said, that she's like the master of short stories, modern kind of era, and there's been some other authors that hold her in really great regard, but I think she also had a number of novels too. So yeah, and she's still alive too, 96. Dang, like, so yeah, like a long life. She's seen a lot. So but yeah, so yeah, Cynthia Ozick. Um, but anyway, oh yeah, and there's also an interesting thing. The only other thing I saw about her was like, she was like, was Norman Mailer. She had like, I think in the 70s at some point, there was like a town hall thing where Norman Mailer was like kind of not necessarily clashing, but kind of just in the talks with a bunch of feminists at the time, and she asked the famous question about like what color ink does Norman Mailer dip his balls in, and that was like kind of, it was something that it was like stemming, the context was that he said something to the part of like that he was that as a male writer, that's like he couldn't escape the kind of masculinity of like the kind of a seeming kind of maybe toxic kind of what we might call like toxic masculinity today. I mean, the guy stabbed his wife. I mean, I know that much, but I mean, I'm not a fan of Mailer, but I'm also not here. I'm not going to try to demonize him, like especially in something that's not really about him yet, and I haven't read any of his stuff yet. But But for what it's worth, yeah, she had a really, like, a witty kind of way. Like, the way she worded that question was very clever. Anyway, so that is all I have for the shawl. And yeah, thanks for watching.